Does it sometimes feel like comics are kind of running the same stories or the same genre over and over and over? Do you ever have the feeling like you've read all this before? Well, chances are you have, and there's a reason for that. Hey there, this is Perch. An interesting phenomenon kind of about comics, and a few people have noted this. Mark Miller is one who comments on this from time to time. Although, for whatever reason, well, I mean, it's not whatever reason, I know why the reason, but people will dismiss Mark Miller constantly online of being kind of a kook or not really plugged into what's going on. It's an odd thing. But anyway, this behavior is that the comics are in a cyclical or like a cycle, let's say an arc, where the arc lasts somewhere between 15 and 20 years, and you get a bunch of the same type. You get a kind of innovation, and then you get a bunch of regurgitation for that period of time, and then the cycle comes to an end, and then you get something new, and it kind of maps out that way. And if you take a look at the time frame of kind of like the early 90s and the mid 2000s, if you look at kind of these steps, it means we're nearing the end of one of those cycles and we're heading to a new one. And there's a lot of signs that that is true. Usually that transition from one cycle to the next is really, really messy. The new cycle kind of something will kick off a spark, and then there will be a bunch of immediate copying and a bunch of kind of the old cycle kind of clinging on for dear life to the new one. And I think if I'm being, honest with myself, I think that the recent X-Men relaunch that took a lot of people by surprise that Jonathan Hickman did, kind of picking a team and having a level of control outside of editorial, where he was kind of handpicking some of the teams and the story and the direction and really kind of curating how it was all going to run and launch, very tightly coordinated. Um, he did that, and it took people by surprise. And now we're going to see a bunch of copying of that approach. We're going to see kind of a superstar creator. There will be pretty good opportunity for a handful of folks. I think the people like Scott Snyder, the people like Brian Michael Bendis, the people like Tom King, the people like Donny Cates, they're going to have a pretty good opportunity now to kind of curate, for lack of a better word, a line of comics. And I think my bet, if I'm making predictions, is that Donny Cates is going to get handed the Avengers here after Jason Aaron kind of exit stage left, and this will be kind of his run on Thor is going to be kind of a trial balloon for what a Donny Cates of Avengers would look like. Maybe I'm wrong, but it has that feeling. But anyway, you're going to see a bunch of kind of try to recapture the magic of what Hickman did with X-Men. At the same time, you're going to see some really kind of odd behavior in the X-Men line as some of kind of the for lack of a better word, the old elements or the elements from the last 10 years try and kind of infuse their type of storytelling or kind of themselves into that X-Men line. And now will be a big test of, does Hickman have the control that he thinks he does, or that's been rumored? Is he managing things? Does he feel some loyalty to some people that helped him along the way that's going to cause him to kind of redo some things? That it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out, because it will be messy. And we've seen this in the 90s. You saw this where it was very messy from this kind of, the image artist, withdrew, and then there was this big art push, and there was titles solicited that never came out. And then you had a bunch of kind of this almost extreme type storytelling, and then you had Heroes Reborn where people came back tomorrow. And you had this kind of this weird period there. And how weird will this period be? I think pretty weird, because what we've seen in the last 10 years or so is kind of this push of comics where we got away from kind of the epic storytelling, the big crisis, and we got into more personal stories. The thing I've said in the past is, those stories that Chris Claremont would do where the X-Men would be playing baseball for 4 pages or so, and then a big threat would arrive, and then that's how the Mutant Massacre started. There's some big baseball game going on, and suddenly one of the Morlocks came digging up through the baseball diamond and kind of just wrecked their whole field and the game. It's just a shame. But anyway, um, in the last 10 years, we've seen entire comic stories or maybe even arcs that feel like that 4-page Chris Claremont baseball game just drawn out over 22 pages. It's like, and when this was done initially, a good 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was seen as kind of cool that we were getting kind of a, we were going to buck tradition. We are going to defy expectations and not have the big superhero action story. Instead, we're going to have more personal moment, going to kind of endear people to the readers like Claremont did and, like worked for that branch of comics. But the trick to it is you can't do that every issue. You can't do it over and over and over. But instead, people would do it. And then Marvel kind of gravitated to this way of saying, hey, the comics that last 12 issues is kind of a rarity. So, if we bring out a new artist, new creative team, they're going to have this kind of one decompressed story to tell, and then they're just going to tell it over the course of 12 issues, and then when it kind of sales bottom out, we're just going to relaunch it and then regurgitate, try again and again. There's been this kind of style that's been going on that in a lot of respects, I think clearly isn't working anymore. It's, another way to put it, other than the Chris Claremont baseball game, because I may be dating myself by saying that, is it's a Scott Pilgrim story. It's the one where, yeah, some big things are going on, but there's a lot of kind of more emotional, more, beat moments in the story that, it tells a more real, it's a different type of storytelling. Okay, again, all that can work for Scott Pilgrim, and it can work for stories, from time to time. But if you then try and insert the Scott Pilgrim storytelling style into the Incredible Hulk, then it gets weird. It doesn't fit. It's like saying, it's okay for somebody who likes movies to say, I like a good, Martin Scorsese gangster movie. I like The Godfather. I like some of these types of films, this genre of films. Oh, and by the way, I also like, Marvel films. But don't mix the two. Don't suddenly like take Martin Scorsese's next gritty kind of, mafia style drama film, and let's go ahead and cast, Batista and John Cena and and Brie Larson. Let's just throw all them in there, and then we'll have them like quipping and stuff while they're fighting off the Irish mob. I mean, just you wouldn't do that because that wouldn't make any goddamn sense. But anyway, that's we're entering a time period where we've been in a time period where the same type of story has been done over and over and over and over and over. And the reason for that is kind of exactly what I said. You get creative team comes in, they get one thing that's successful, and then they repeat and clone over and over. And on top of that, you get editors, especially junior editors, they were hired in to do this one job, and they aren't trained to do another job, so they do that one job over and over and over, and eventually it just grinds itself into the ground, and maybe new people come in, maybe they don't, maybe people get promoted or shuffled over to another office, and it kind of spreads around, and then eventually you have what we have now. I'd say all this without malice. I mean, it's not, this happens everywhere. It's not just comics, it's TV shows, everything. You get, something will kind of hit with readers or with viewers or whatever it happens to be, and then they'll just clone forever. And that's, there's just not enough creative ideas out there in the world to really do this right. So it happens, and it will continue to happen. And like I said, we're entering a period where like the tipping point has been reached, and these stories, these cloned stories and cloned concepts and cloned ideas just aren't landing anymore. And so now what has to happen is a change needs to occur, and the change will occur, and we'll get different stories, and maybe X-Men is one of those changes. Maybe some of the bigger writers, maybe Undiscovered Country, if it really hits, and it becomes the next Walking Dead, maybe that's another one of those comics that becomes a change. I don't know. There's a lot of opportunity for it. But, you'll see the dying gasps of the previous generation kind of fade out, and then we'll see this new one. We'll enjoy it for 5, 6 years, and then it will start to repeat and clone, and we'll go through all this again and again. It is the nature of the world. That's why a lot of people who grew up in the 80s and kind of early 90s who really liked that era of Marvel and DC comics are so frustrated now, because the era that we're living in today, this repeating, is pretty much 180 degrees the opposite of that thing that we all got drilled into our heads for a decade or more. So, it's natural for us to feel like this isn't speaking to us, because it's not. But it will come around and things will improve and the world turns. Isn't that east to west? The world turns. The great stone turns. There's something turns. It's been a long day, folks. Anyway, what do you think about all this? Is it reasonable theory, bad theory? Does this explain stuff? Do you feel like you're reading the same story over and over? Leave me a comment below. Love to hear your thoughts. These were some of mine. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.